Back here at home, Build One South Africa says it has written to President Cyril Ramaphosa urging him to establish a national convention comprising all 18 political parties in parliament. The party says this is in an effort to decide on the purpose, agenda and the scope of a new government of national unity. Party leader Mmusi Maimane joins me now for more on that. Good to have you, and thank you very much for your time this evening. We heard earlier on from the DSG of the ANC that the party has now extended its consultation even broader to parties that are in, but also parties that are outside of the GNU. There is a real prospect, if you like, that the coming together of the smaller parties could in itself see the ANC forming a 50+1 government without the Democratic Alliance. And you could play a critical role in that. Are you awake to that possibility?
Good evening, and good evening to fellow South Africans. So, of course, when we went into the elections, we went in with a promise of ethical leadership, an economy that's inclusive, and ultimately safer communities and an educated nation. Now, what we would not want to do is form part of a government that didn't give expression to those objectives. Whether to just be in government for government's sake is not what we are seeking. What we want is to advance the interest of 60 million South Africans. So the role that we would want to play is one of achieving that particular South Africa. And at this point in time, no one has furnished us with an agenda, a plan, and our letter and our concern is that we want to ask the president to convene a meeting where, if you accept the fact that the ANC could form a government with the smaller parties, all those parties, in fact, invariably, in some way or another, lean or endorse some aspects of the National Development Plan. And therefore, that would be a good basis to start to craft a plan that would then, post facto, be able to then say, here are the best people to serve in cabinet to advance that plan, and ultimately to capacitate the administration to ensure that it works towards achieving that plan, so that whatever the headwinds of coalitions look like, ultimately you have an administration that has a clear, dedicated plan to work towards in the next 5 years. In the absence of that, you are merely just sitting in seats or in this GNU type arrangement, really without an agenda or a plan, and ultimately not without the accountability to be able to know what South Africa would look like 5 years from now.
Have you been made an offer in the portfolio of education, and would you take it if it was made?
Again, I want to emphasize, it's not just merely taking on a ministry. I have clear views on education. The fact of the matter is that I want an education where our kids pass at over 50%. We want to make sure that ultimately teachers are capacitated to remain in classrooms, to ensure that they're freed from all hindrances of teaching, to ensure infrastructure is well built. Now the question will remain, is that A, the agenda of the current setup, and B, would it be a shared objective? Because when you want to fix education, you also want a budget to achieve that. You also want to ensure that there's funding for ECDs. So partly, had it been the case, and my discussions with the president have always been such, to say that when we agree on an agenda to work together, whether I'm in the ministry or not, I will endorse that plan. But where I feel there are profound shortfalls that cannot deliver against that plan, I certainly can't. And so it's ultimately my reflection back to President Ramaphosa and to anyone who is in the current government setup. I'll certainly give them my inputs about what I feel the plan of government needs to look like. And if we can find consensus on that, we will be ready and available to serve.
Yeah. Do you think it's precisely why we are, a week later, still unable to finalize this conversation around the formation of cabinet, and we are seeing a leaking of ridiculous kind of demands for all sorts of positions instead of, as you put it, a well-orchestrated national program of governance and service delivery? The reason why we are in this kind of mess is precisely that we started in the wrong thing instead of starting by putting this national convention together and coming up with that program first?
That is absolutely the fundamental issue in my view. Keeping in mind that we're not the first country to go through a coalition government. Countries all over the world go through this kind of situation frequently. The Dutch have had their elections 3 or 4 months ago. It's only now that the government has been put together. Because of the amount of work you go and say, you foreground everything with having a consensus for what the government must do, and then put together a government that says, here are the actions that you are going to take post facto. And it happens in Germany, it happens all over. And Africa is a unique situation in certain parts, but it has a direct presidential election, which changes the dynamic. In our instance, I feel that we've complied with a constitutional requirement to elect a president, which took place well within the prescribed period as per the Constitution. Now, I really do not feel that we should put ourselves under such severe pressure to elect a cabinet, because then the view simply remains jostling for positions. And therefore, all the parties that are currently signatories, or all the parties in essence, are spectators to the ANC-DA almost spat on positions. Positions that if I sat here today, I said, what would the deputy president be doing? I still don't know. What is the leader of government business? What is that government's business? When you say you want DGs, what do you want those DGs to be appointed to do? And does that mean if the coalition falls apart, then the department has to be subjected to yet another DG who comes from the party? Is it an exercise in patronage giving rather than people serving, rather than let's prioritize the 60 million? And so I think what we are doing is we are accelerating on the short term and actually slowing down the long term. I would rather it doesn't need an extensive conversation. As I've said, the starting point is to create that cogent plan, bring a number of leaders together so that even if you disagree and you say, I'm going to go to parliament to form a constructive opposition, at least you are clear what on earth you are opposing or what on earth you are willing to hold the government to account. Otherwise, you are going to create a scenario like now what we are seeing is this haggling over cabinet. Next, we'll be haggling over policy. Actually, where policy is effectively meant to be debated, funded, transparent before the people is in parliament. Are we going to have these backroom dwellings where we are debating policy on education, on the economy, etc., elsewhere, and then sending it to parliament as a rubber stamp? That certainly to me is creating a parallel process that undermines democracy. We have a massive opportunity now to demonstrate to the people of this country that democracy has its own dividend, which it has shown that it can bring about change. And secondly, to be able to lead from a school of thought that says, actually, this is a shared plan to which not only are the political parties enjoined to, but civil society, other aspects of society, to be able to create this moment where all of us say, we may differ in points, but here's what South Africa we all want to see, and let's all pursue it. Then that's a better conversation about a government of national unity. What we have at the moment is a coalition between the ANC and the DA, with parties enjoining to be spectators to that aspect.
Let's entertain that thought a little bit of this grand coalition between the ANC and the DA. You have been on the other side. Others are saying this is not a negotiating tactic. It represents an unmitigated attempt of the DA to get hold of control of the strategic sectors of South Africa's economy. Would it be a bad thing if those sectors were in the hands of the DA, in your view?
Look, I wrote an entire book about the DA simply because I wanted to express, obviously, naturally, why the DA has a particular worldview. And it really does. And that worldview is not always necessarily inclusive of all South Africans. So in this particular instance, when I read the letter, people all sounded surprised and all of that. I said, it's standard. It is expected of the DA. It doesn't surprise me, did not surprise me least bit to put that on the table in the way that they have. Because even though in some ways there's the hypocrisy of saying we don't practice cadre deployment, but actually we want our own DGs, which I found quite strange in approach. But having said all of that, I think that to me, if you really want to give full fulfillment, it's not about whether they should go to the DA and to the ANC. It should be, and I hate to, beat the same drum, but it's to simply say, if we had a plan, let's assume in the economy, we took aspects of the NDP, or we took aspects of saying we're going to stimulate the township economy, we're going to do this, then we need to answer the question, who is the best and most competent South African who can serve as minister? And ultimately, who do we deploy into cabinet? Because if we achieve that, then we can hold each other accountable to what we are in fact going to do. If the DA shows competence in that area, fair enough. But if it doesn't, I really believe let's appoint the best person, because South Africa's problems have not disappeared as a function of an election. In fact, citizens of Soweto, as we speak right now, don't have electricity. Now we have to answer the question, do we want to replicate the last 30 years, or do we want a fundamental reset? As what the voters they didn't just say work together, is what everyone is saying to say when they voted. The voters also said they want change. They want change in the trajectory of their lives and the issues that they face up to. And therefore, it becomes absolutely fundamental that we appoint the best and the most competent people to portfolios. And if we get that right, then I think we can begin to railroad through this period. Because I promise you, one of my biggest fears that I face post this moment is not what is going on now, is where South Africa will be in 5 years' time if we mismanage governance. Because what this election has showed us is that we can have a propensity to be divided on the basis of race, ethnicity, tribalism. And if you entrench that into society by having poor governance, you will then mean that the next elections will merely be an expression of people's identity rather than their ideas or their ideals. And so if you hold on to just that society as it goes forward, I really believe it will be a detriment to the people of this country. And therefore, I call again, President Ramaphosa must convene an urgent convention of parliamentary leaders. We must table a plan before each other, appoint on the basis of the competence of that plan, and focus at every state of the nation to holding ourselves accountable to say, is the state of the nation achieving against those objectives? Because when we do that, then I really believe you'll see other aspects of society become invigorated by that vision.
I'll take you again to what Nomvula Mokonyane said earlier on, saying we are at the doorstep of an agreement. I think Cyril was speaking earlier on in one of the radio stations, saying she believes in the next 24 to 36 hours, actually this will be signed, sealed, and delivered. Are you not concerned then, therefore, that this is going to be railroaded, as you put it, and you are going to be left out of it, and for the next 5 years, all you're going to be doing is, as hard as you've worked to get into that parliament, is witnessing a continued exploitation of economic resources by the ANC and the DA this time, while you continue to have a good professional parliamentary career?
What is the agreement basis of? Is that if then we must then say they're at a doorstep of an agreement. It is not a doorstep of an agreement of a government of national unity. It is an agreement between the ANC and the DA. Then it must be that. Then whether or not I was in the GNU or not, I must be clear that the agenda of the ANC and the DA is what is now working. And therefore, accountability must be affected. I'd wish that the people of South Africa had given us a majority to govern ultimately, but they haven't. They've actually asked us to go into parliament and fight for them. And that is an obligation I cannot reject, just merely to be able to say I want to be a spectator to an arrangement between the ANC and the DA. When you make a call to the people, you've got to be able to honor that. And so for me, fair enough, I do take the point, but that you are making about what the next 5 years will be. But I really believe, to my integrity, I need to be able to say, let's then build a constructive opposition. Let's then ensure that when we agree with what the arrangement that the ANC and the DA come to, we support it. But when they don't, let's hold it to account. I think that if we miss the role of a constructive opposition in the next 5 years, we also run the risk of the same government exercising excesses and no one being able to sit and make sure that it doesn't fall into abuse. And then we wonder why after 5 years, we have a state that's captured, except this time, it will be captured by a different formation.
While I have you on, I suppose many have been weighing in on this. Corrupt accused or even charged, making it as members of parliament. What is the view of Build One South Africa on the swearing in of Zizi Kodwa?
I really hold, when people invited us to a conversation about even this GNU scenario, they put before us that we must have shared values. And one of the shared values I always find entertaining is when people say we share a common value on fighting corruption. What do you say to the people of this country when you say you share that value, but in practical terms, people who are charged with corruption must then return to parliament? It says the value is a value only in paper. Therefore, these are hints and symptoms of a document that is there only in letters, but it doesn't really exist in practice. And so for me, the swearing in of Zizi Kodwa, it must be a cause for concern that when we all campaigned and when people stand up and say you need new leaders and you need all of that, you cannot stand and watch for that. I think that it is a mistake. I think it's a failure of the ANC to be able to bring Zizi Kodwa back to parliament. I think it is an insult to the people of this country. And I really maintain in the strongest terms that if they can never stand up in the next 5 years and say they stand strong against corruption. Because if the corrupt accused are able to go back to parliament, it is truly saying to the people of this country, corruption becomes a victimless crime, which is absolute nonsense. The victims here are the people who still today are without schools, are without healthcare, are without jobs, because money was stolen.
Mmusi Maimane, as always, much appreciated. Thank you very much for coming on, leader of Build One South Africa. Let's take a break. We'll continue in a moment.